Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
We will have a dynamic story about how everyone thought one man was a monster, but he turned out to be the one who was least expected to be. I used to have a hard time in my life. I grew up in a poor family and we had to economize on almost everything. My mother divorced my father when I was young, then had a lover who soon became my stepfather. But he was by no means a loving parent. He liked to drink and he had a bad temper, and I often got hit with a belt for nothing just because he was unhappy with something. As time went on, my mother became attached to the bottle, too. As a little boy, if I couldn't sneak outside with the other children, I would hide in my room in the closet because my mother and stepfather began to fight a lot. I couldn't bear to hear my mother's screams and cries. Growing up, I started running away from home and unwittingly got involved with a bad company. Mac was in charge, he was the oldest, and he was stronger and more skittish than the others. Yes, he was bossy and sometimes he could belittle others, but still, I was calmer there than I was at home. It was in that company that I met the girl Lisa. She was a young, pure maiden who had struck a chord with me, her blue eyes and snub-nosed nose firmly imprinted on my memory. She was Mac's girlfriend. He often dragged her along with him. I could see in her eyes how she took no pleasure in his company. But she was an orphan, a runaway from an orphanage, and it was hard for her to survive in this world alone, and she had to endure some discomfort. Lisa, why are you with him? I can see how you were suffering. I spoke to her once when we were lucky enough to be alone. Kurt, I'm fine here. At least better than where I was. It's all right. You don't have to worry. Mac takes care of me. But he's just playing with you. Let's run away together. I won't hide it, I really like you. And I can't stand to see you putting up with him. No, it's okay. She lowered her eyes and left the room. I felt sorry for her. And it took me a while to convince her to leave this company and come with me to another town. Luckily for us, Mac and his cronies weren't looking for us. At least I didn't think so. I had reached the age of 18 by then and could get a job. But I didn't have a lot of schooling, so the first job I got was as a handyman in a warehouse. I did not earn much, of course, but sometimes I worked second shifts, and Lisa and I had enough money to rent a room and buy ourselves something to eat and dress. Since childhood, I liked to draw, but I always had little time for it. I contented myself with sketching in my notebook during my breaks. I was caught doing this by my boss. What have you got there? He approached me quietly, snatched the notebook out of my hands and stared at my scribbles. Give it back, please. They're just drawings. I'm not wasting my working time on this. Wait a minute. He took a closer look at the pictures. Kid, you got talent. Did you learn that somewhere? No. I've loved to draw since I was a kid. I didn't even have time to study, let alone learn to draw. Give it back. I'm not doing it at work anymore. You know what? He looked at me intently. I don't think your talent should go to waste in these dusty bags and boxes. I know a guy who works in a comic book and children's magazine publishing house. It's not a studio with an easel, but I think you should talk to him. He handed me a notebook. Thank you. But how am I going to keep my job? I have to pay for my room. Don't worry about it. If you want to, you can always come back here. I'll give you a little advance. But you go and try yourself out. Come see me after your shift, I'll give you his details. The boss wasn't grumpy at all, on the contrary. I couldn't believe it could happen. I had dealt with far more angry people before. I thanked him, and having hidden my notebook in an inner pocket, I went to perform my duties. The next day, without telling Lisa not to worry because she turned out to be pregnant, I went to the specified address. The head of the warehouse promised to put in a good word for me. I tentatively knocked on the door, and when they answered, I hesitantly entered. I found myself inside a spacious office with several desks, some of which were occupied by artists drawing sketches. I was met by Dan, the one I was recommended to me by my boss at the warehouse. I had a brief interview and Dan took me on as an intern. My life finally took a turn for the better. Dan kept me and I started making good money doing what I loved. Many years have passed since then. Lisa and I bought a house that accommodated the three of us and the dog pretty well. Lisa also got a job at a sewing shop. Yes, we didn't live rich, but we had enough for everything we needed. I also made my own workshop in a separate room, and sometimes I was able to sell my paintings. One day Dan and I decided to visit a local bar. I was getting promotions over the years and I was almost his right-hand man. And also we just became friends. He was quite responsive and friendly. and so he invited me to celebrate with him the next issue of the comic we were working on. The inside of the bar looked pretty decent for a drinking establishment. I'd never been here before. Dan said that the bar hadn't been open very long and he had been planning to visit the place for a long time. We were seated on high chairs behind the bar and the bartender took our order right away. The cheerful music was softly playing and the atmosphere allowed us to forget about the hustle and bustle of everyday life. We looked at every corner of the place while sipping our beer. I really liked it. It is quite cozy. In the distance was a billiard table lit from above by a few bulbs while the rest of the room was dimmed, which created a relaxed atmosphere. I watched two people playing a game of pool and a few of their friends watching the game intently. It looked like they were playing for money. I had never tried my hand at it and I wanted to know the rules of the game. "Do you like billiards?" Dan asked, noticing my interest. "So, it's interesting. I've never played." "Want me to teach you?" he offered. I eagerly agreed, and when the company had finished their game, we came to the table. Dan showed me what to do, how to do it, and what balls to roll. I succeeded not at once, but with time I began to gain experience. Wow. What people? I heard a noise behind me. I turned around and saw a man in a leather jacket and leather pants. His long wavy black hair and goatee hid his familiar features. As I searched my memory, I remembered the man. It was Mac, the same one whose company I had once belonged to. "Hello. It's been a long time." I said hello, not knowing what to expect from him. It was likely that he was angry that I had left his gang quietly, taking his girlfriend with me. "It's been a long time. You look like a man now." He put one hand on my collar. "Yeah, a long time indeed. How have you been?" "You know what?" He rolled his eyes as if remembering. "I was a little shocked that you disappeared like that. I was worried about Lisa too. Thought the cops had got you. But then I found out you'd made your nest." I braced myself that he might start a fight. "Are you all right?" Dan came up to me. "Yeah, I'm fine. Met an old acquaintance." "You play pool?" Mac asked. "How about a game?" He suggested in a tone that made it clear he wouldn't take no for an answer. I reluctantly agreed. Dan offered to play for me since I was just starting to learn, but I said I didn't care if I won or not. It's just a game, nothing more. Mac and I took turns chasing balls, forgetting them in the holes. But he won, of course, no matter how hard I tried. But it was predictable. I thanked him at the end for playing. "Wait," he stopped me as I was about to leave. "How is Lisa? How's Daniel?" He smiled, but it wasn't a sincere smile, more of a bad one. Daniel was my son and Lisa's son, the one we'd raised. But how did he know about him? I realized that Mac was here for a reason. But why now after all these years? Not wanting to get into bulkheads, I politely replied that they were fine and said goodbye, saying I had to go. We went back to our seats at the counter. I sensed that this encounter did not bode well, but I tried to stay calm and not show it. "You look worried," Dan remarked. "Is he threatening you in some way?" I didn't know how Dan could help me. It was an old story of mine, and I didn't want to bring him into it. We sat for a little while longer, and then we went our separate ways. When I got home, Lisa was all excited when I got home. "What's the matter? You look so pale." "Kurt, do you remember Mac? When we were young and we were friends with him. He did. He's back. I don't know how he found us." "Did he threaten you?" I took her face in my hands and looked into her sad eyes. "Did he do something to you or Daniel?" "No, he just did. He just said hello and asked how you were doing. I saw him when I went to school to pick up Daniel. He was already talking to him. I was so scared." Shoo. "It's okay." I pulled her against me and stroked her back. "He's not going to hurt us. I saw him today too. He won't do anything to you or Daniel." I tried to reassure my wife, but I felt as if I wanted to reassure myself as well as her. In the back of my mind, I had a bad feeling. I did not know what I should expect, but I knew for sure that now my life would not be as quiet as before. But as the days went by, I expected every minute that something bad was going to happen. I talked to the teachers and gave his description so that if they saw him near my son, they would call me immediately and call the police. I didn't want to risk the child's life. You never know what's on Mac's mind. But Mac didn't bother us, and I was calming down little by little. Lisa continued to go to work as before, but soon she told me that they were downsizing and that she had to take extra shifts now. I suggested that she quit her job altogether, but she refused and asked me not to interfere with her work process. After getting a promise from her not to overwork and to quit if she got tired, I agreed. But those extra shifts of hers had the effect of alienating us from each other. She was often not home at night, and our relationship was no longer what it used to be. She became more cold to me, didn't want to talk to me much, and started paying less attention to me in bed. I tried to talk to her about these changes, but she did not want to talk. Sometimes she just rudely blew me off. Even my son began to notice that we sometimes began to fight. I was no longer willing to tolerate this attitude toward me and my son, so I decided to settle things my own way. I called her at work and asked her boss to come to the phone. I asked him why people were being forced to take extra shifts because of the cutbacks. But his answer surprised me a lot because he had no idea what kind of downsizing I was talking about and what extra shifts we were talking about. And I realized that all this time Lisa was just lying to me. But why? What was she hiding from me? I realized that it was useless to talk to her because she would not admit it anyway. After apologizing to my boss for the misunderstanding and asking him not to tell Lisa about my call, I began to think of a plan to find out what my wife was hiding from me. I shared my sadness with Dan and asked him for a few days off, promising to work it off later. He, understanding my situation, agreed. I went to the sewing factory where Lisa worked. She was definitely working on the day, and I parked nearby near the end of her shift. As I waited for everyone to get off, I saw Lisa too. She stepped out of the building and got into a cab and drove off in the other direction. I didn't hesitate to follow the cab. We arrived at a residential area on the other side of town, and I saw her go into one of the houses. I left the car not far away and followed her. As I went to the window, I saw her and Mac in the room. I saw him start to take her clothes off and cradle her in his arms. The fox didn't even resist. On the contrary, she loved it. I watched the scene for a while, then went back to my car. So that's what your shifts are like, I muttered to myself. I didn't understand why Lisa had done this to me, but I could feel my blood turning black with anger and hatred. The woman I had led away from a dysfunctional path and whom I had cared for so much all these years had betrayed me so much. I had already called my wife from home and, trying to keep my voice steady, asked when she would be home. She replied that she was on shift again and would be home in the morning. Out of rage, I almost crushed the cell phone in my hand. I called Dan and asked if Daniel could stay with him for a while. He also had 2 sons, and his sons and my son were good friends. Dan gladly agreed. Don't do anything stupid, he asked me in a friendly way. Don't worry, everything will be fine. I finished talking and took my son to a friend. I took the dog to him too. I did not sleep the whole night thinking about how to end my wife's cheating. I had all kinds of thoughts in my head. I did not notice how morning came. When it was quite dawn, Lisa returned. Hi, honey. How are you? You know, I'm so tired today. It's been so much work. Where's Daniel? Did he leave for school so early? Daniel's fine. Sit down. I sat her down at the table. When's your next shift? Tomorrow. Why? That's good. Just tell me which shift you're on, at the factory or with Mac in bed. Lisa went instantly pale. What are you talking about? With Mac? What do you mean? I haven't seen him in a long time. What are you talking about? Don't lie to me. I interrupted her. I've seen you. I've seen the job you're in. Answer me. Why? Lisa was crying. She told me that Mac had promised her a lot of money and that he'd get her a job as a model because she looked so good for her age. I couldn't believe she would trade her family for money in this way. I felt an intense anger fill me. There was something in me at that moment, something evil, because I, who had never raised my hands against a woman, had beaten Lisa badly. I came to my senses when she was lying on the floor, her nose and mouth bleeding. I didn't understand why she wasn't screaming and yelling, she was just moaning in pain. Call Mac. I handed her her bag, which was next to her on the table. Call and invite him to our house. Call or I'll kill you. Lisa reached into her purse with trembling hands and pulled out her cell phone. Under my scrutiny, she complied with my request. Lisa told him I wouldn't be home for a couple of days and she wanted to meet him there. Mac replied that he couldn't until later in the night as he had a lot to do tonight. That suited me just fine. I don't know why, but I got a bag of frozen peas out of the fridge and threw them to the fox to put on the bruises. I stayed home with her all day. Without letting her out, I made sure no one knew about our scandal. I waited until nightfall and turned out all the lights, leaving only the night light in the living room downstairs and in the upstairs bedroom. Mac came as promised. He entered the house through the back door, as Lisa had said, and began to make his way to the stairs in the dark. He called for Lisa, but I sat with her in the bedroom and held her mouth with my hand. Then, taking a handkerchief lying around, I tied her mouth and hands behind her. Armed with the gun I had prepared beforehand, I carefully began to make my way down the stairs. When I finally saw the familiar silhouette, I fired. Mac's body collapsed on the floor. I turned on the light, walked over, and tried to feel for a pulse. But the bullet hit the heart area and Mac died instantly. Going upstairs to the bedroom, I pulled Lisa from there, untied her, and put the gun in her hands. She looked at the body on the floor in horror. "Kurt, what have you done?" she asked. I saw her gaze lock on me and she raised the gun, aiming at me. There was a click. It might have been better with that. I took a clip out of my pocket and showed it to her. I took the gun from her and put the clip back in, hiding it behind my back. "Oh, Lisa, what have you done? Why did you kill a man?" I spoke in a tragic voice. I called the police and they believed my version of what was happening because Lisa's fingerprints were on the gun. She'd been sentenced for murder. I visited her occasionally and reminded her that if she said a word about what really happened, there were people in prison who, for a good reward, would silence her forever. What do you think of this story? I think it's interesting that Kurt was very cruel, but I wouldn't do that to these people because taking a life is too much for me. Now we invite you to listen to the second story, which is about a mean woman who got what she deserved in the end. As a child, I was a very quiet and shy child. My father worked as a librarian, so he really appreciated the peace in our home. My mother was an elementary school teacher, and she generally shared my father's need for quiet. I had no brothers and sisters. At times I experienced a little loneliness, as I would have liked to babysit or play with someone. As an alternative, I asked my parents for a small pet, but they didn't support this idea either. In order not to get bored at all, I often turned to books for help. I loved reading various adventure stories and imagining myself in the place of the main character. If I could, I would have become a writer myself. It was hard for me to go to school. It was extremely difficult for me to make friends, so I preferred to do my things alone. I used to carry a small draft with me where I wrote down various noteworthy things. It might have been a great foundation for my book in the future, but I lacked the confidence to create. Something seemed to constrain me all the time, and so I could not begin to express my creativity. Books gradually began to take a secondary role in my life because new priorities emerged. First of all, I needed to get into a good university. My grades were average, so I started to actively study. In my situation, the choice of specialties was not very diverse. My parents were poor, therefore it was necessary to settle down in a niche which could guarantee me a high income. The choice fell on the economy. Despite all my worries, I turned out to be a very diligent and hardworking student. I had no choice because I didn't want to disappoint my parents. "We're so proud of you," my mom used to say to me. Of course, these words could not help but rejoice. After getting my degree, my life turned out pretty well. I did an internship at a successful company, and then, thanks to my efforts, I was able to easily settle down there. My employers always spoke of me as a fairly competent and talented employee. My family was proud of me, and I was happy with my life situation. Of course, I still wanted to improve my skills and get the best position possible. Therefore, I worked very hard. I had no time at all for my personal life. I had learned to ignore those kinds of needs. It seemed to me that if I could suppress the need for a relationship, I would be much more effective at my job. To some extent, this turned out to be true. What I did not consider was that in this state of affairs, I would be forced to experience loneliness. It manifested itself not only in psychological needs, but also in physical ones. I had a clear problem with my intimate life, or more accurately, the lack of it. Probably I would have lived like this for another decade, but there was a new colleague in our office. There were other girls at work and I had no feelings for them. But Karen seemed really special. Her appearance was very pretty, which attracted many men. Her character also seemed charming. Every time she passed by, it seemed as if a train of warmth and light was trailing behind her. "Karen, meet Jared," my boss said and pointed his hand toward me. "He's here to show you around and bring you up to speed." The girl smiled sweetly. I extended my hand cordially and shook her thin palm. "It's a pleasure." "Me too." Word for word, and between us began a fairly warm relationship. We got along perfectly with each other at work. Perhaps it was the fact that our quiet personalities were perfect for each other. Maybe this is my chance? I wondered on one of my workdays. Time passed and my loneliness went nowhere, especially since the last time I had intimate relationship was about 7 years ago. If things kept going like this, I was sure to start having health problems in the distant future. One day I asked Karen, "Would you like to go out for a cup of coffee with me after hours?" It seemed as if my colleague was not at all surprised by such a request. On the contrary, perhaps she was waiting for the moment when I would invite her. "Sure." "So you'll be free this Saturday?" "Yes." I chose a small themed coffee shop downtown. In fact, it was the only place I visited on my own initiative. If necessary to discuss some work issues, I always invited colleagues to this place. I like that indie music was always playing there. It calms me down, but my employees are older and they don't really fit in. Karen and I are younger people because she's in her 30s, like me. The day we met was very sunny. Karen wore a short skirt and a nice white shirt. My view looked more casual, but within limits. I stared at Karen in fascination. "Hello," I said loudly as she tried to find our table. "Oh, hello." My colleague sat down right across from me. "I think we can switch to you because we are about the same age. How do you feel about that?" "Oh, of course I don't mind. It's lovely weather outside today. How was your trip? Any traffic jams?" "No. At first, I thought I was going to be a little late, but at the last moment the cab driver started to drive like crazy." Karen had a little smirk on her face. "We made a reservation." I looked at her awkwardly, not really knowing what to start talking about. I did not want to talk about work, but domestic topics did not seem quite appropriate either. I was a little worried. Apparently Karen was waiting for something from my side. "You know, and in the office we talk to you mostly about work. Tell me something about yourself. I would like to know what your hobbies are, how you spend your free time." Karen thought for a few seconds. "In my free time, I usually take care of my plants and my 2 dogs. Their names are Loli and Bomb," she began to say. It was clear from her expression that she was trying to choose her words as carefully as possible. "I also enjoy attending cultural events. I meet new people quite often. I also keep diaries." "Journals?" I asked him, puzzled. "Yes. Personal diaries. I really like to write down different interesting things. It's a habit I've had since high school. I have a pile of journals at home." Karen made a little demonstrative gesture with her hands. "About 19 or 20 of them. Can you imagine?" I was pleasantly surprised. "Wow, do you really enjoy writing?" "Yeah, I wanted to be a journalist when I was a kid. When I was in the sandbox, I used to make up all kinds of stories. But at the moment, it's no longer relevant." "That's too bad. I wanted to be a writer when I was a kid. I even kept a few drafts of various interesting ideas that I once wanted to pursue." The girl looked at me with her eyes wide open. It seemed as if we had found the perfect topic of conversation. For another hour or so, we discussed our childhood hobbies. This was the moment when I was really interested in my companion. "I have a big bookcase at home. It's mostly nonfiction, but there's also fiction. Maybe you'd like to take a look?" "Yes. Could we go to your place right now?" I was very shocked by this reaction because I didn't expect her to say yes so quickly. My house was always tidy, but I rarely hosted girls at my house. I didn't have a car, so I had to lie that I was taking a cab today. When we finally arrived at my place, I gave a little tour. My little library looked imposing in Karina's eyes. With curiosity, she looked at the shelves while I told her when and under what circumstances a particular book had been purchased. Then we decided to sit in the kitchen and discuss some more things. To spice things up, I poured us a glass of wine and put on some music. Not half an hour later, we were in my bed. I was very nervous at first, for my lack of practice over the years was making itself felt. But Karen was a little drunk, so I reassured myself that she wouldn't notice some of the awkward nuances in this situation. Sleep with her turned out to be a pretty good idea. Apparently, we were both satisfied because our communication did not stop afterwards. We formed some kind of long-lasting intimate relationship between us. We usually met after work, went to some places, discussed something, and then went to her or my place. I was completely satisfied with this arrangement. At first, I wasn't even going to claim anything more. After about 6 months of this kind of relationship, Karen asked me to move in with her. I was not against it, but I was surprised at how she argued her proposal. "We've been dating for so long, it's time to live together," said my colleague. "What? Is something wrong, Jared? Are we dating?" "Of course we are. Or why do you think we're doing all this?" Karen said. I was extremely surprised. It never occurred to me that we were in a relationship. I didn't know we were dating. We hadn't discussed it. I could see from the girl's face that she was uncomfortable. Apparently, she was worried and nervous. "Don't you want it?" she asked openly. "I do." The girl sighed in relief. I was very surprised by the situation, but all changes are for the better. I didn't even have to make a move myself. Karen came to live with me in my apartment since her place was rented. Our life together was going very well. We were organized people, so we divided all household chores equally from the start. Only unlike me, my girlfriend behaved more secretly. The first thing, as soon as I noticed those very personal diaries in her hands, I wanted to read them. With the girl's permission, of course. But Karen reacted negatively to this. She warned me not to touch her personal belongings as it was a violation of privacy. I promised her I would never do that. Our fates worked out so that after a year I decided to marry Karina. The idea seemed very stable and tempting to me since I needed love. Moreover, cohabitation with her was simply comfortable. "Will you marry me?" "Certainly," joyfully exclaimed my future wife. We lived together for about 8 years, and amazingly, in all that time we never once had a fight with her. We didn't have kids because we didn't want to have any. Our financial situation allowed it, but I just didn't want to become a parent. In my heart, I wanted to remain the same young, ambitious guy. Karen explained her reluctance by saying that raising children was too much of a challenge for her. This behavior of women always seemed strange to me. Could they, like us, not want children? One day a very silly idea occurred to me. For some reason, I thought there was another reason why my wife didn't want children. However, she just doesn't say it out loud. One day, while Karen was at work, I decided to read her personal journals. She probably would have minded, but she wouldn't have known about it anyway. I picked up the last completed notebook. From what I understood, it contained entries from somewhere in the last 6 months. I opened the first page I saw and began to read. Another strange and eventful day was over. I stayed to work overtime, so I got home around 10 o'clock at night. I was sick and tired of this job. If I could, I would quit at the first opportunity. Lately, absolutely everything has been annoying to me. When I got home, Jacob was already asleep. The jerk didn't even leave me anything for dinner. Frankly, I was shocked to be called a jerk because Karen had never called me that. I leafed through the pages, and almost every page had some sort of swear words written on it. Most of them were addressed to me. I felt genuinely angry about this attitude. I kept flipping through the pages. We went to a restaurant with Thomas today. It was fun, although I like spending time with Jacob better. Thomas is better in bed, though. At that moment, I realized why she wouldn't let me read her diaries. It turned out that she was cheating on me with someone named Thomas. And not just with him. She had scribbled practically the entire notebook with comparisons about who was better in bed than me and who was worse. I felt the most ashamed of myself at that moment. Karen and I didn't have such a deep connection that I was killing myself with grief. But she had suggested the relationship herself, and now she was writing all this humiliation in her personal journal. I began flipping through other notebooks that referred to the period when we had known each other. The more I read, the more upset I got. All this time, she had treated me horribly. I wanted to tear out the pages, but I could hardly restrain myself. She was being disgusting, and she was fully aware of it. That's why I wanted to get back at her. Karen totally deserved it. For the past few months, I had been perusing her journals. They were filled with various complaints and uncultured profanities. Obviously, such entries could be seen as compromising material that I was going to use in the future. I also took particular pleasure in reading her recent writings. Over the past couple of days, she had written several posts about how she didn't like my beard. Of course, I wasn't going to shave it off. Many of the things that annoyed her were masterfully done by me. The amazing thing was that she didn't show it at all. I decided not to torment Karen too much and bring the day of retribution closer. I had prepared in advance all the Xeroxed copies of the necessary records. On the same day, they were sent to all of Karen's acquaintances. Unfortunately, I didn't know the addresses or even the phone numbers of some people. However, I had the address of Karen's mother, who would later receive the most interesting quotes from her daughter's diary. Also, her colleagues, her boss, and a few other people would receive such letters. About 24 hours after sending it, my wife received the first call from her elderly mother. This conversation took Karen by surprise. Already when she was fully aware of what was happening, her face instantly changed. "What did you do?" She shouted. "Send copies of the diary to your acquaintances." My wife threw herself at me with her fists and started to fight. Tears came out of her eyes. "Who gave you the right to do that?" Karen sobbed. "I'll be fired. And mother, why are you doing this? Who let you play with me for so many years like a toy? But I loved you. I was with you the whole time. Sleep with others doesn't mean anything. I just wanted to describe my experiences in my diary." "Well, now you'll know to keep all your notebooks under lock and key," I kindly replied. And so ended my marriage. Maybe I should have broken her personal boundaries earlier, because if it were not for my curiosity, I never would have found out about the cheating. I'm sure I'll be much more discreet next time. Write how you like these stories and what you think about the actions of the main characters. See you again.